So our panel have agreed that they're prepared to take questions. So don't go anywhere. I promise we did ask them first. I didn't just spring that on them. So there's a question there. Can somebody give Dominic a mic? Keep coming down.
Forward.
Thank you. I would like to thank you very much for your talks. Can I just ask Jack, I'm very interested to know, when you received a diagnosis, can you, if you're able to, if you don't mind telling us, was that personally helpful for you? And if so, how? And can I also ask you a slightly related question? Were you aware before you were diagnosed that you had that diagnosis, or did you realise that, did you have some insight into that diagnosis beforehand?
That's a very good question, thank you. Personally, for me, even though I think it's a perspective in terms of growing up as an adult, that I've probably more as a child, I was largely more ignorant about my condition, or pretended a lot of the time it wasn't there, or tried to act in a way that that would be seen as acceptable among my peers, because a lot of my peers were mainstream students who didn't have conditions themselves, so they would have been completely unaware of probably what autism meant or other learning disabilities that existed out there. So I think it was a bigger relief for my parents to know, and probably for the teacher who did spot the symptoms when I was in year 5, that I wasn't getting along particularly well in maths and was very resistant to one of the teaching assistants there in their support for me, because I hated the subject, and I generally still have a strong dislike for maths to this day. So nothing hasn't changed there in that sense. But I think when I was going forwards to secondary school, that I probably did become much more aware that the support out there was much more was beneficial to me, that I was able to have access, for example, for computers and extra time within my exams. So I recognised that in that my limitations there, that I struggled in getting my handwriting across, especially when I was writing particularly fast, and it would become quite messy a lot of the time. I think having that diagnosis has definitely helped me come to terms with, as I've grown up, because I think the mindset does change from childhood to adulthood.
Thank you.
Shall I try just talking first? It's on my way. Mr. Kiri, looking back to when you were around 12 or 13, what one or two things with regards to your school would have made a difference?
Well, when I did sort of have the feelings, it was around this time in 2009. So I was going through my SATs in year 6, and I was going through the transition from primary to secondary. So I personally think that my year 6 teachers, if they would have recognised that my mood had changed, because I had to go over to Ireland and I was there for like 2-3 weeks. So from coming back like the way I was, it was a massive change, and it was ridiculous how I could see in pictures my face just wasn't the same as it would have been like 6 months beforehand. So I think if they would have even just recognised that my mood was changing, and when I was in lessons, if they could tell I was just not interested, I just wanted to have a bit of a break, then they'd let me go. But instead they'd hold me back and they'd say, well, you've got to get this bit because your exams are in a few weeks' time. And it'd be a bit like, oh my gosh, and I used to want to call my nan, because I used to all the time. It was an everyday thing, and then I couldn't do it. So if they would have at least respected that I needed to leave sometimes and taken me serious, then that would have helped. And maybe when I went to secondary school, I got bullied literally almost immediately, like it was just a straight away thing. I think if the teachers would have at least tried to help in the bullying, whether they understood that I was struggling or not, because they didn't know me, but if they would have at least tried to hold back on the bullies, or at least tried to take me away from the situation, it would have made it much easier.
Okay. Mark.
Thank you both for your lovely talk. I've got a more general question about your Young People's Advisory Group. How do you get involved in this? Where do you hear about it? And how do you choose that this is something you would like to do?
I think that's a a good point there. For NCB, we tend to advertise much of it. There's a lot of information online. So if you go on, they have Facebook and Twitter accounts. So if people are on tweeting today as well at the conference, then you can follow at NCB tweets if you're interested in the updates and opportunities for young people. Currently, we have young researchers vacancies. So if people are very interested and passionate about research and contributing to what organisations are doing. Most recently we worked with the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, for example. There are vacancies open for that, and there are other streamlines as well. That there are, if you go onto the website ncb.org, is that the website?
Yeah.
There is a young NCB page, especially dedicated to promoting the opportunities that are available and writing applications out. And I'm probably sure as well that I'm aware that a lot of young children and young people don't like writing applications sometimes, or that it's not their particular style of applying. They might prefer speaking on the phone or doing a filmed application. So I'm sure that if you email someone like Amber over there, that they would be able to accommodate that to allow different forms of applications, because I know that written ones can be quite difficult for some people.
I mean, the other thing that we do, we have a whole range of different organisations that sit within NCB. So we have the Anti-Bullying Alliance, we have the Sex Education Forum, we have the Child Bereavement Network. I could go on, but we use those to work out in frontline services to offer support groups, local interest groups, work with services, and we will advertise our opportunities for young people to get involved or help local services to set up their own local groups, where we might then put in one of our young research advisors to offer some sort of buddying support to get something set up. So we work as flexibly as we can, and because we're national, we can cascade things out. Obviously, you know, it's driven a bit by our resources, but as much as possible, we try to offer opportunities for young people to get involved. As Jack said, it doesn't have to be coming. In fact, we try to avoid too many meetings and face-to-face things, because actually that's taking people out of school and things like that. So we're very much trying to experiment with more online and webinars and Skype and things like that as well.
And I think to answer, I think it was, did you say what sort of made you want to get involved? It's the fact of, if we didn't get involved then, and young people sort of just disconnected completely, then who would? So it's the knowing that you're helping not only yourself but everyone else whilst you're doing it, and it makes you feel really good.
Great, man, it seems a good time to come.
Just a question about kind of where you work, because I know that health and education and things like that are all devolved. So I live in Wales, and that's all separate to what happens in England, and whether NCB actually work in Wales, England, Scotland, Northern Ireland.
We are predominantly in England, but we do have a Northern Ireland office, and we partner up with some organisations in Scotland. The one area of the country where we haven't got much presence is Wales, and I don't know why that is. It's not that we don't want to work in Wales, it's just that for some reason we're less represented there.
Thank you.
Lady up there.
As a parent, I'm very aware that children spend a very large amount of their time in school, and that school can have a huge impact on their mental health. My experience as a parent has been having my child in a school that was actively hostile to children with special needs, where the head said things like, "We are moving away from inclusion." I'm concerned about the forced academisation of schools and what impact that might have on children with special needs, knowing that academies have a reputation of being more hostile to children with special needs. I wonder if any research is being done on the difference of between the experience of children with special needs at academies from other schools, or whether that research needs to be done.
I'm not aware of any research, certainly not at NCB, but what I do know is that the Council for Disabled Children work very closely with the Department for Education. So, for example, they were very involved with the recent SEND reforms and all the guidance, and they work very closely with Ofsted as well. and they are well aware of the concerns about academies. And also, I think the pullback of local authority involvement as well in terms of the availability of pastoral care, access to the sorts of support services. So the Council for Disabled Children would certainly be aware of that, and through their close work with DFE would be keeping, you know, those sorts of issues on the radar for the department.
I would say, I've been a previous governor of a primary school, and it can have an effect, although it's clearly something that's not to say talked about, that schools can be wrongly worried about the effect of having children with special needs, and that affecting results even at primary school. So the unnecessary hurdles that can be put in the way from getting your right to choose the primary school that you need, I think actually that is probably a more acute area than potentially the secondary school area.
Goodness. Do you want to comment on that?
I don't think I've got anything to say.
Apart from the fact that it's appalling.
Appalling, yeah.
Are there other questions? Well, yes, somebody right in the back. You've got to run up the stairs. Good for your health.
Student schools.
Hang on a second, there's a mic coming.
Yeah, because really can't hear that.
My mum was a Senko in a school that was one of these outstanding schools in Birmingham that's top of the league tables in the primary. And she said she regularly had to sit there and apologise after the head had left the room and said, well, if you don't like it, we've got a very long waiting list and you can always go and get your child educated somewhere else. So I think these are regular things that happen and don't get reported because parents are like, who do we tell this to? If we keep moaning, nobody's going to listen to us. There'll be nowhere for our children to go. And I don't think it's an unusual thing to happen. I've homeschooled my son for a while. He gets high rate disability living allowance, which pays for him to go to a private school. But I go to the council and I'm like, what school can you give him? And they're like, well, actually, we haven't got one really for him. And these are kids that need an education. Am I meant to pull my child out of school at 11? Am I meant to not work and be at home with him? I think he's at present he spends 2 days a week just having lessons to cope with being in a school setting. So he's only managing 3 days of actual lessons. And he's my son's high functioning autism. He's not got severe problems. But being in a school setting, everything freaks him out. Everything worries him. The fire bell goes off. There's a puppet doing PSHE. There's fancy dress day. There's Father Christmas. These are just things that kids have to deal with daily before they have any tests in Year 6 and before they hit a lesson. And I just think it's a really scary place to be for a lot of children, and that's a real shame.
Maybe we should listen to kids about how we organise the school. Sorry, there's somebody here.
Sorry, my son went to private school and he didn't have a diagnosis and things started to go very wrong for him. And we tried to get help, and the first place we turned to was his school. We said he's going through a very difficult time and we don't know what's happening, and can you give him some support? Well, within 3 months, he was out of that school. He had an academic scholarship, he'd had a music award, and that was the end of his education at that point. And I suspect the academy system kind of mirrors that, I suspect. The commitment is to results as much as children. That's one thing. He did end up in care, so that's his journey. And obviously, that has been traumatic for us, for him, and there's huge cost to that in every sense. I'd encourage you to include looked after children in your panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you pass it this way, actually? There's somebody waiting here. Okay. Carry on.
Hello. My son is now 11 and he's been diagnosed with ADHD, and he feels that his school aren't helping enough. They're now an academy, and basically he had a one-to-one. She left with cancer after 6 months, and then they never replaced her. Their policy was that, it's not really good for his independence to have a one-to-one, but to take a TA away from a child with social, emotional, behavioural and learning difficulties is like taking a wheelchair away from a child with mobility problems. But I also work for the same academy, so it's very tricky. And I just wondered whether you go in and you get children's views on how their SEN support is going for them, because there's no one asking my son. They've had the money and they've got lovely furniture around the school, but my son doesn't feel that he's receiving the support that he needs. And he's starting to get very angry about it. And he comes home and lashes out at home.
Oh, great. Sorry, do you want to respond to that? Sorry, there's a lady there then. I'm coming to you in a minute.
Stuart,
yeah, sorry, please carry on.
My brother's exactly the same. I chose to go to the sixth form for the first year, stupidly, because I was bullied again. But I was actually, I don't know whether they may be the same system, and this may be something you could suggest, but the sixth form students or secondary students that sort of work with the primary school or in the same area, there's actually a system where I live where they'll go and they'll not pick a student, but the student can pick someone. So I made like a sort of portfolio and I gave it out, and the students came back to me and said, oh, you know, I'd like to talk to you. And I did it for as long as I was there for. But my brother's exactly the same. He was offered the same treatment. He was offered to speak to a teacher, didn't like the teacher, she didn't help him. He didn't want someone sitting next to him in a lesson because it made him different. I can listen, I can understand what the teacher's saying, I don't need someone else. So maybe if your son, how old is he? Maybe if he could ask, or maybe if you could ask if there was a system or someone to be put in place for an older student to take the time to say, okay, this is what I can do. Do you want to speak to me? Because it did really work at my school. So maybe that's a possible area you could go to.
Interesting idea.
It's only really quick, and it goes back to the schools really, because I moved 4 years ago to a new area, and my little boy was only just under 3 at the time, and we were taking my little girl to see a local school, beautiful setting, lovely. And then I said, and him in a year, you know, when he's bigger, and she just went, oh, I think you should send him to a special needs school. And it's a bit, you've seen him for 5 minutes. And she said, look, we've got something called a green paper, and he'll be lucky if he gets 20 minutes a day, and, you know, really you should take him somewhere else. So I took him and my daughter somewhere else.
Good.
And when I took her to the next school, the SEN was lovely, but when it came for my little boy, and things were more evident then, and yes, he is in a school which gives him extra support now. But at that point that I had to make that choice, which was hard because I was fighting for mainstream for him, I then got told, oh, that's a shame because he'd have been good for our kids. And I'm thinking, that's my 2 local schools. What about what's good for him? No, and not just that, and I'm going to give the mic to someone else. But very quickly, Kiri, you did bring something up earlier, and I've got a 25-year-old, and he's had his own difficulties and things, and he came across a teacher once, and he gave him the best project, and he put so much effort in it, and he handed it in, and this teacher looked at him and went, yeah, go summarise it, there's too much. He has never, ever put effort into anything since.
That's depressing, right? Lady up there, and then you. So, lady up there.
I just want to say thank you. Thanks, Jack.
This is a question actually for Jack.
Sorry.
You're around the same age as my eldest son, and it's quite a personal question, so I hope you don't mind me asking it. How was your anxiety going from being because I've got 2 older sons. My eldest one turns 20 next month, and my second eldest one is 18. How did you find, and what would you give me for advice from your perspective with regards to transitioning from, say, a college or a school into being a young adult with autism?
I think that's certainly quite a challenging one, because I think it's every person has a unique experience in life, and the young person makes their decision. So, is your son currently in FE at the moment, in further education? Or?
My eldest son, a scenario with actually a college and not a school, quit college because he called out a teacher for getting a question wrong. Then lost faith in the whole course because of that one teacher. So he's now currently unemployed. He was working for his dad, but that proved difficult for him there. So he's in a transitional sort of period. My 18-year-old is doing performing arts because that helps him with confidence and speaking publicly. But he's now struggling because he doesn't know now what to do next. So they are in further education, my 18-year-old, but my older son is not. And he's in that sort of, he doesn't know because of his depression which way to turn.
I think for me, I probably went through quite a traditional academic route of moving from college to university, and one of the big things if your 18-year-old does ever consider going to university is certainly plan to get disability students allowance, and that was definitely one of the biggest ends of support for me. But I think turning back from what was from a personal perspective and giving me more confidence in being more independent and able to go out and confident enough to socialise and talk to other people was youth work, essentially, and a lot of youth work that was provided within my local area. I think it's underestimated a lot, and I think NCB will probably understand this as well, from that in many local authorities and communities of the extent of cuts and the reductions of youth service provision, and for the voluntary sector in a lot of communities there's a big struggle at the moment as the local authorities try to offload their work into youth workers and those organisations that simply don't have the capacity without the extra resource. But it's the individuals, the youth workers and the adults that make it work there, because they were so professional and supportive of me, that they treated in a way that wasn't patronising, and that they wanted me to become much more independent and to be able to utilise my skills within the projects that we were working on. So we had 2 heritage projects, were the big ones from Heritage Lottery Fund, from the Young Roots programme, and that was probably a big step for me in moving ahead and thinking about what I wanted to do, and what some of my skill sets were, and that was completely outside of education. So I didn't need to be in college to be a volunteer, to go to with the organisation with Dorset Youth Association, which covers most of the Shire County, and the impact they made on me was huge, and enabled me to work with other organisations like NCB to have that curiosity and the power of what volunteering can do for someone, and to grow in confidence. And I'm not sure if it might be the perfect solution for your son who's currently out of employment, but I would certainly say that volunteering is an ideal pathway into developing those skills and that ethos of what it's like to be in the workplace, as long as it's not exploitative as well. But like an unpaid internship, for example, or just effectively doing workfare, that's not volunteering. That's more slave labour. So I do make a distinction there. But for good youth work and getting involved with projects that are fun and that you want to be involved with, that's my definition of volunteering for me.
Brilliant.
Sorry,
Thank
one
you. Very
last
helpful.
question.
So just very quickly, just to say thank you for what you've brought, because you've certainly given us hope as parents as well. And as a parent, I've 6 children, and 2 of them are autistic and ADHD and sensory processing difficulties, and both gone through mainstream. And in terms of the education part, there have been plenty of times. My eldest son is 22 like you, and you even look a little bit like him. But he's had 2 breakdowns, one in year 5, one in year 9. Cam's, it didn't work. It just didn't work. And yeah, he has turned off so many times, but this year he graduated from Strawberry Hill with a distance degree, foundation degree, and he goes into schools and speaks in assemblies because we need to empower our young people, and I think that's what NCB are doing. And as a member of Parent Forum and a national network, it's how can we link our young people with you so that we can be about empowering and that there is accountability. There actually, any parent or young person could go into a school and say, that is not acceptable in law to speak like that to our young people or to exclude them. We not only demand, we expect respect and inclusion. And you've just given me so much hope, because we talked about all this research this morning, and to be honest, I felt a bit depressed by dinner time. If I'm honest, I did. But you have actually given, because it's like we're telling the same story over and over again, and we're sat here and we know exactly how it is, but what are we doing with it? How do we join together as one voice and just say this is... So NCB, I will certainly be on that website and we'll be sharing this throughout the national network too. But thank you, Kiri, as a sibling, because my boys have 4 siblings who are phenomenal, but they have needs too. And thank you, Jack, for all you said. Thank you very much.